I'm Melissa Rowe, and you're listening to Dollars, Diplomas, and Decisions, made possible by the Uncommon Individual Foundation and On Track Plus. Our guest today is Barbara Ellis. Barbara is an advocate of student and community-led education and homeschooled her sons, who are now students at Harvard. She's taught private school students on the Philadelphia's Main Line, facilitated AP and economics courses with homeschoolers, and directed a workforce development initiative empowering teens in leadership and civic engagement. She most recently served as the director of a pre-law fellowship, coaching underserved applicants through the law school admissions process. Barbara holds a master's degree from the University of Pennsylvania's Graduate School of Education and a master's in writing studies from St. Joseph's University.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Barbara, you have a wealth of knowledge. You've homeschooled your sons. You're a professional in the scholarship space. So I just want to start off by asking you, what should parents do to get their students ready for selective college admissions?
And we're talking about high school students, middle school students?
High school primarily, but if you have some insights for parents of middle schoolers, we know the earlier they start, the better off they probably will be.
Absolutely. Personally, I feel like helping students explore their interests as early as possible. And that is because, selective colleges might look toward a talent. And so the more developed a talent can be, the more it can, shine. And so I think that that's helpful. I also think that for parents, it's never too early to start looking at the schools, understanding the financial world, the net price calculators. Every school has something on their website that can kind of give you a ballpark. They're not always, in our case, they weren't perfect, and they don't really account for merit aid or other things like that. But just knowing, I've met parents who have left the decisions to their children. They're working hard in their classes, they're working and participating in activities. And so they just trust that my kid is talented, my baby's doing what they need to do. And that's true. But, it's competitive. It can be competitive if you're looking for money, if you need money. So just understanding what different schools will charge, I think that that's important. And I think that also helping your child flush out, nobody knows, I think it's difficult for a 15, 16-year-old to say, this is what I want to do with the rest of my life. But trying out different things, being involved in the community, helping them develop leadership skills. And that can be in their religious community, that can be in their neighborhood, that can be at school. There are a lot of different opportunities. And then I also think that, we're in Philadelphia. There are a lot of resources, free resources, where students can kind of explore their interests. And so supporting them in that.
Awesome. So helping your student as soon as possible explore the things that they might be interested in. Not necessarily asking a middle schooler to declare a college major, right, but really just thinking about, hey, does my child do well in gymnastics, right? Is my child really interested in science? Or are they always getting A's in science and maybe not so much in gym, or things like that? So those are indicators for parents.
Right. And then the next step is, summer can be very important. I know not all schools offer, they have the resources. If you have a student who has a particular talent in math, some schools have great math teachers, but there might be some things during the summer. I know, again, I don't know if this is going to local families, but some colleges might offer, summer math programs that might be free. And, just different camps and things like that, engineering and other things to kind of help them explore. And if a family's resources are not robust, ours certainly were not, calling those organizations and asking if they have scholarships or financial aid. We did that a lot.
That's a good tip. A lot of parents think that, your kid isn't applying for scholarships until they get to college. And the truth is, for some of the out of school time activities, especially summer programs, there's scholarship funding for students to be able to participate. So it's good to know that the amount of resources or the amount of money you have in your household shouldn't limit you from trying to get your kid into different activities to help expose them to things.
Yeah, my sons were musicians, and financial aid, summer scholarships carried them because it would have been just very expensive.
I can imagine.
If not. And I also know that that's true for, and there are some activities that we had to pull out, once you get to travel soccer. And it, those prices started, it was like, oh, well, this is a new day. And so, we had to make some decisions. And so a lot of the navigating that we did was around the costs of things.
Those are really helpful tips, Barbara, for people who are preparing their kids for these more selective and highly selective schools and even scholarships. Now, you have some insight that most people don't have because you've seen hundreds of college applications and scholarship applications. So I'm just going to ask you, when you are trying to assess, right, a student's profile, maybe even, thinking about, well, who might get this scholarship over another student, what are the things that stands out in a student's resume? What will make two 4.0 students different in terms of who might get the funding, who might not get the funding if they're coming with the same GPA?
I like to see students who care about others, and caring meaning I know that I can have an impact. It's not all about me. It's not I'm just going to get my grades and be put on and I'm just waiting, to make my move and it just benefits solely me. But the benefit that it can have on other people and other lives, caring about their community, caring about making a difference in a positive way. That's what I like to see. And so ways that could be shown is, starting a club or even leading a club or just kind of looking out the window, looking and seeing, what needs to happen and how can I affect change? That sounds a little, big and lofty, but, I've known young people who, are going into the neighborhood and working with young people during the summer on the play streets. A lot of what I did in West Philadelphia it was a program where teenagers went and they presented summer camp at the local parks and on the play streets. So the streets where students got meals, they just brought books and they brought games and they, would talk about plants and, just other things and just really, being young mentors to those 7 or 8 year olds on the street to let them know that that they're there and they see them. And I could see even with that program, the older people would smile, when the teens came down the street. And a lot of times, in certain neighborhoods, that's not always the case.
That's so true. And I think for a long time, when we are talking about preparing students for college and for scholarships, there's this community service number of hours, right? And so a lot of school districts have it kind of built in. And so they say, well, you need to serve X number of hours in community service. But that's a hindrance for a lot of students, especially if they're coming from households where they need to work, to help pay for some of their own educational expenses and things like that. And so it's good to know that students can find other ways to be of service and get that community service under their belt in a way that's meaningful to them and their community, but not that they have to, segment off 4 hours on a Saturday, every weekend to do something like that.
Right. Yeah. One of the things that navigating the homeschool space is that, on a single income, that can be challenging. And so what a lot of homeschool mothers often say is nobody researches better than we do, which means we're just trying to find something free or cheap. And so through that, I had started posting things on social media, Free in Philly, because there are so many, there's like a construction camp for young girls that starts in middle school through high school. And it, leads them into solid union jobs, so I just things that people may not know of that could really be impactful. And so just going through and keeping your ear open or tapping into programs that can help students find out, what's going on, what's in the community, whether they're interested in arts or music or sports or STEM. There's, and I think since COVID, there might even be more opportunities you can tap into online. It takes time. It's that balance of, do you have the money to pay for it outright, or do you have the time to invest to search? But I think that going to college is an investment for the family. So, I can't say that it's easy because of the time commitment, but I definitely think taking the time to just try to find some things to help your child navigate is worth it on a number of reasons. One, it helps their resume, and two, it might help them lock into what they don't like or what they do like, so they're not taking those classes and then realizing sophomore year, I don't like this, and you've paid for it. And you may have to start over or backtrack or add other classes.
That's really important as well. We often think about making our kids picture perfect for the college committee and scholarship panels. But to help them when they're younger understand, you might not want to go into, medicine, right? If you're not going to do really well, or like me, if you don't want to dissect anything, then probably medicine is not the place for you to be. So that's good. I would also say, to your point about, moms doing the research or parents doing research to see what's in their community, a lot of times it seems like the students' schools, high schools in particular, are untapped resources. There's a lot of extracurricular clubs that, take place there. Some of them have even national foundations in associations like DECA and things like that. Right. Yeah, so I think, thinking about what's going on in your local community, but also starting right where your child is if you're not homeschooling and they're in a traditional school.
Yeah, I worked with a student this year who was the president of his school's DECA, and he just got in agricultural sciences, and he just got a full ride to University of Florida in that space.
That's impressive. So Barbara, as a mother, you've gone through this college application process with your sons. Can you provide any tips on how parents should help their children choose what colleges to apply for and which colleges to leave off their list?
Which colleges to leave off their list is hard because it depends on where the child is, right? Ideally, being able to tour, I think, makes a lot, but that can be expensive. Particularly if your child is not wanting to stay local, that can be expensive. So even YouTube videos or some of the online platforms, attending some of the webinars, to get as much information. Maybe there's someone at their school who had gone before. There's some websites that I would say stay away from. Like if you have a child who happens to have a lot of anxiety, I think that there's just some Reddit forums or College Confidential where you've got a lot of 17-year-olds giving professional advice. I've got this stat and this is what I made and this is my grades and I want to apply to this. And then you've got a whole bunch of other 17-year-olds saying, "Oh, you'll never get in," or "Yeah, you're." Nobody knows that. You don't know what the schools are looking for in that particular year. And so one of the things that I do tell young people is that, in my opinion, I'm not sure that any school, like there are certain popular majors, business, pre-med, engineering, computer science. But the schools need someone to major in languages. They need someone to be in the theater. They need someone to fill out these other majors. And so being able, if a student has an interest in that and being able to explore that, because I'm not sure that if there are 100 spots and 99 people, apply, they could all have 4.0s, but they all want to major in computer science. They're not all getting in. So, a school is looking for a class. They're looking for a balance. And so not being afraid, obviously you want to make sure that when you go to college, that the investment is worth it, that if you're looking ahead, that you'll be able to, not have to take on too much debt, and you'll be able to, be in a workforce position where you can afford to pay off if you do happen to take out loans. Another thing that I would like to say is that, sometimes schools that have a lot more money, bigger endowments, their sticker price is bigger, but these do tend to be the more selective schools. So right now, I think I'm talking about students who are high achieving, but being able to consider some of those that they might even be more affordable than, some of your other options. I know that was certainly the case in our family. Harvard is significant. Can I say this? Significantly cheaper than what Penn State offered. Significantly cheaper.
Wow.
Significantly.
You want to break that down for us? Because a lot of parents who are hearing this will not believe what you just said. So we know of Harvard is our first university, right, our first college founded in the nation.
Right.
And it comes with a lot of prestige. It, heads the Ivy League university. So how did you come to find Harvard to be cheaper than a Penn State?
They have a larger endowment, and for families who are not extraordinarily wealthy, and for schools like that, Harvard, Stanford, that's different, right? So because they have wealthier families, students who are with family incomes up to $250,000, they would be considered for aid, whereas, that's not necessarily the case at many local schools. And I think for us, with Penn State, they wanted like close to $40,000 a year. And I thought that's the state school, that's the state flagship, and wasn't expecting that at all. And, Harvard just had, they don't give merit aid. It's based on family income. And as a homeschooler, we had the single income. I had some side positions, but not a full-time position. And so with that, it was more affordable. And that was across the board with the selective schools that they applied to. My son had done a week-long program at the University of Texas. And so we were out of state. But they did say, we have scholarships. And so he applied, and they wanted $66,000 a year. And so, we're like, why you even bother putting this on the page if that's not going to times 4 times travel? My family's from Texas, so we thought, it'd not be far from grandma, and that might be nice, but they could have kept that. So.
Yeah, That's good to know. Can we talk a little more about that? Because, we have parents who are like, if my baby gets in, this is the school I'm sending my baby to. And not only are students being indebted, trying to get themselves through school, but, parents have access to things like Parent Plus loans, private loans. And so what's the barometer? How would you help a parent who's, my kid got into their top choice school, but it looks like it's going to cost us at least $20,000 out of pocket after they applied a scholarship? How should a parent gauge if they can actually afford that as an investment, or if it's just a bad investment and they should sway their student to considering another school on their list?
Considering another school, yes. I work with students this year, kind of came in at the tail end of the process, and they were just like, I'm from Maryland and I like big schools. I like big sports or whatever. Applied to Ohio State, applied to Penn State, applied to UCLA, got in. And, I tried to tell them, glad that they did apply to their home school and they are going to that state school and the resources do match what the family can match. But, they would, Miss Barbara, do you think they'll care? You don't pay taxes in that state. And so, definitely understanding that, asking the schools if they have merit aid, institutional aid. Some schools, if they are looking at students, for special scholarships, it might be early. Some schools as early as October, will want to get, those applications in. Appealing, some schools just have their budget. And if you're talking about a large school with tens of thousands of students, maybe they might not have, but you can always ask. I would say always, always, always ask if there is something, maybe a departmental scholarship, maybe, an alumni funded something. But as plan B, plan B, plan C, applying broadly to know, and doing that upfront work, right? To right now, junior year, looking at those net prices that's on the website and trying to understand what that might look like, developing relationships. So you're not shocked, because that could be, come February, March, when those decisions start coming in April, just trying to make sure you're not shocked, that you have some sense of what this is going to look like. I think that there's a little bit of work that you can do up front.
So if we talk about the work, what would your top 3 things be for parents so that they know that they're in a good financial standing when it comes to the colleges their kids are applying for? And also that these colleges would be good settings for their children to be in as well, because it is their home away from home, right? Maybe for 4 more years.
Right.
So if you had to narrow it down to 3 things that a parent could do in advance of the actual college application process, what would you say to parents?
Well, we talked about my spreadsheet, which was a little insane. But I did, we started out with a lot of schools. And, I had that Google spreadsheet and it would tell me if this is a REACH school, if financially, if the school was a match. We looked at if they offered, with the percentages, if they offered Pell Aid, if their loan packages typically meant that parents were, they can offer a package, but it's not meeting everything. And so, students get something and then there might be another $30,000 that the parents are expected to take out. And so just kind of going through that and looking at that, before the student even applies. There were a lot of schools that we eliminated simply because those numbers just didn't make sense. And then going deeper into the financial health. I know this is kind of going into the weeds. My spreadsheet was a little in the weeds, but there are websites that can tell you that if the school's financial health is in a good place. I had a mom reach out to me a few days ago, and she said, I hate to say it, but she said, thank you for telling me to do some more work about the University of the Arts, because did you find out that they're closing today? And I didn't see that. I just know we looked at that spreadsheet and it said that, the health of the school wasn't that great. There are also websites that will tell you I'm thinking of one by Jeff Levy and Jeannie, I forget the last name, and I can share that with you later. But it's a spreadsheet of schools that give aid to non-need families. So, so families that, are not, necessarily considered, they're not low income, that middle income family who take the brunt of it, and it's really hard. They don't have, the money to pay. They might have multiple kids, but just some schools that incentivize, talented kids coming to their schools. And so a lot of the more selective schools are just going to give aid to students who have financial need, but there are quite a few colleges who will give aid to students who they recognize have done the work.
That's good. That is really good. And I'm so glad to know that there are many more options. Today we hear, oh, college, and then we think, oh, money, right? Because we know that the cost of a college education is so expensive. But then there are also ways that parents can be intentional about making the cost of their kids' college education more affordable. And so I know there are even some schools that have a model where students aren't actually paying tuition if they're admitted. In PA, we have like a Thaddeus Stevens. And so schools like that are saying, hey, if your kid can, maybe pass this test in electrics or pass this math test, and they really have an interest in this, there is money here for them. There are some schools that are work colleges, and so students are kind of earning their keep as they go through the process. So there is a lot to be done in terms of that research that parents can do. And so we'll be sure to link the resources and the websites that you mentioned so that parents are able to, kind of get in the weeds if they want to. So, Barbara, I know that homeschooling children allows for more flexibility in their curricular offerings. But for those parents who have children in traditional schools, what would you recommend to supplement their child's experience?
We spend a lot of time in the after-school space. Most of my kids' activities happened after school and on the weekends because that's when that makes sense when they were offered. And then once my kids got to high school, we utilized dual enrollment. Drexel has a program called the High School Scholars Program, where if you test in, you can take one free course per term. So they did that. And I know, a lot of community colleges across the country, they are low cost or free. We used our community college to check off certain high school core courses. I can't teach languages. I can't teach physics. I can't teach, math. And so, I was very grateful that resource, was available. But most of the things that they did and just, tried happened in the after-school space. And when I say after-school space, that means the nonprofit organizations that offered things, the local public access station, they have a young journalist program. They tried rowing for a while because that was free. And I had heard that rowing is a good sport for tall people. And my oldest son is 6'4", my youngest is 6'9". And so I thought this would be great, but then it conflicted with the music that they were already doing. They did I don't know if the Apple Store, a lot of these places have free summer camps and things like that. So we just, as I said, my job was to research and drive and get them in front of people who could, a lot of library programs. I know that some of the pharmaceutical companies there's Glaxo. Am I not supposed to be saying names? I hope not. But I think it's national. I definitely know it's in this area. They have the free STEM programs that run through the libraries during the summers over multiple weeks. So we tapped into a lot of that stuff.
That's awesome. That's good to know. I think a A lot of parents might think that the best use of their child's time outside of school is to get a part-time job. But for students who might not need that money, it would be good if they could participate in some of these programs, pre-college programs, things that, again, will help either build their resume or help them decide, I don't even want this on my resume because I'm not interested.
And if they do need to work, the program that I talked about earlier, the Young Women in Construction, I think that it does work with PYN. So certain students, I think the older students can get paid. The program that I did in West Philadelphia, those students get paid minimum wage. So, there are programs where they're now training students to be lifeguards. They get paid to learn how to swim better. And then they also get paid to, kind of help keep the pools open for young people. So there are things that they can do and get paid. But if they need to take that traditional job, just even being able to find mentors. I'm working with one young man right now who has a job working at the grocery store, but he's also interested in storytelling. And so we meet periodically and he shares his anime and we talk through his story arcs and things like that. So, so that's another thing. I've found through homeschooling that everybody has something to offer and people are very generous with their time. And so being able to find that person who might spend half an hour with you talking about what it is that they do.
Barbara, can you talk to us about the differences or similarities between applying to top-tier colleges and universities and applying for lucrative scholarship opportunities? I mean, not just like your community foundation scholarships, but scholarship opportunities that will land a student $10,000 and more.
Okay, so with the spreadsheet that I did, my spreadsheet was crazy. It was crazy. It was crazy because as homeschoolers, there's no blueprint, there's no Naviance, there's no score. I didn't know what the landscape looked like. So I was tracking everything. I was tracking costs. I was tracking climate. I was tracking, what the career aspects might be, even though I was leaving it open to my children to kind of determine what it is. And I knew that they might change, but just, different colleges, if there's an instance of how much these students are making when they leave. I was tracking the graduation rate for Black males, which at some schools can be very different. At some schools, Black males were only graduating after 4 years at 20%, whereas other students were graduating at 80%, 90%. I didn't understand that. I didn't understand it. It came off the list. I was tracking distance to a city. I was tracking, there was just a lot of things that I was tracking to just kind of feel out and understand and become a student of different colleges. Also, my boys were very much into their talents. So they were musicians. They started very early. And I do believe that that's what helped them with their college applications. I don't believe in prodigies. I think it's just a little bit every day. They started out with their music lessons when they're in elementary school. So 30 minutes a day turned into 45 minutes by high school. They were doing, an hour lesson per week. They also did summer camps. That's where I talked about having the scholarships and the financial aid because they played instruments that were not, that were needed, viola and bass. Those opportunities were there. And then I spent a lot of time kind of backtracking different students' bios because I'm not a classical musician. And so what are some of the things the students who've gone before? What are they doing? What are they applying to? So when my son was 13, he went to the Sphinx organization. They have a free summer camp. He did that for 2 summers. And through that opportunity, he was able to, his quartet was able to play at the White House. It was Michelle Obama's last official event. But just those things that looks good on their resume. And so I don't want to get off track, but I think being able to not be afraid to apply. I've met some families who, I want to be sensitive, but they're afraid to send their child out. I don't know these people, so I don't want to turn them over to summer camp. I'm not going to send them away, or even locally. I don't know them. So maybe doing some more research or interviewing or actually talking to people, but just helping your kid develop skills, and then also training yourself to be comfortable with that. I mean, I do get it. But I think that that's what's helpful when I talk to my sons now and I say, you guys are at Harvard. How is it for you? You've got kids who come from exceptional resources, and, y'all don't have anything that didn't come from a thrift store, your toys, your clothes, everything. How does that work? And they've said that, they don't, their vacations might have looked different, a lot different, but the opportunities that they were able to tap into by following their own interests and just knocking on those doors, is what, they were able to travel because their orchestra went to Iceland, and the university that sponsors the orchestra picked up the tab. So there were those opportunities that, had they not been in the room, they wouldn't have been able to take advantage of. I worked with another student who, in high school, she was interested in K-pop in middle school. And so she started watching all these K-dramas. And so she did dual enrollment at her community college in 9th grade. And from there, the State Department has a program, Nestle Y, the National Security Language Initiative. And so she applied after sophomore year. It was COVID, so she had to do it, online, but she was able to travel to South Korea the next year. The State Department, they cover everything. Housing is paid. They give them a stipend. And so she's actually a foster student. And so she went through Questbridge. I'm not sure if people are familiar with Questbridge, but she applied as an independent because she didn't have the family support, and she just completed her sophomore year at Yale. So, but I do think having that, that study abroad in high school definitely significantly helped.
And so for context, Questbridge is a scholarship organization that not only helps students access money to go to some of the more selective and highly selective colleges. They have partnerships with those schools, and they also provide some college prep for students before they even kind of create their college list. And so once you're admitted into Questbridge, then you're able to be admitted into one of Questbridge's partner schools with the funds, because Questbridge will close that gap for the student. What I heard, Barbara, though, when you talk about the prep work that you did with your sons, this student that got to go to South Korea, it seemed like they started working on their resume and exploring their interests in becoming what I call a scholar early on. If a parent is listening and their kid is in 11th or 12th grade, is it too late for them to be a scholar if they're not already on that path?
I would say no. I know that in this past cycle, I've worked with young people who did decide, okay, this is what I want to do at public schools. Definitely driven. I think it takes a lot of self-motivation to do it, but they started clubs, cultural clubs or a nursing club, those things. They started it, junior year. And I think that they did have an impact. And also being able to apply to those programs that kind of help confirm an interest. So the young lady that I'm thinking about right now, she was interested in nursing and then did a summer program with nursing, started a club, and was able to get other students to, a STEM club within her school. And it was impactful, when she did apply to college, and it worked out well for her. And she was in 11th grade when she started taking on that. I do think that her taking on a leadership role probably helped.
Yeah, I think it's also important for parents and students to understand that, you know, we're doing a lot of talk about, hey, here's how you get to college, here's how you get money for college before you get to college. But there is still money and scholarships available to students while they're in college. If your kid needs to pursue advanced degree, there's money and fellowships for that. And so even if someone is listening to this and their kid is kind of advanced in their high school career, it doesn't mean that you should not apply the information, because a scholar is a scholar across the board. You can get everything paid for, up to PhDs and right on and on. And so you would want to think about, what are some of the things that I can take away and that I can start to implement right now, even if I'm in my last semester or quarter of my junior year? Maybe you do something impactful this summer, you know, before you're applying for colleges. So, Barbara, these are the questions that I have for you today. Is there anything that you feel like we left out of this conversation that you want to impart on parents?
I think we covered it. I just think that sometimes this can be overwhelming. And so starting early, understanding that you are a partner. No, you're not going to write the essay for your child. No, you're not going to, do a lot of, but just being there, encouraging them. But then knowing that you have a significant part to play. This is a part of, there are different schools of thought. Some people say, I want my child to explore the world and, follow their own path and passion and all of those other things. But then there's the other realistic part for me, and a level of pragmatism. I don't want my kid in my basement at 40. And so and if they are, I have a child who's interested in music. And so just being able to say, it's also a business. So as much as you're exploring that and being creative, understand how it works, understand distribution, understand networking, understand all of those other skills, and they're transferable, right? If you're, starting your own company in a number of ways, those same skills can work across the board. And can be developed, across the board. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Barbara, thank you so much for joining us today. This conversation has certainly been enlightening, and I just appreciate you sharing your time and your expertise with our audience.
Thank you.